There we go. We should be live. What's going on, everybody? I'm Justin Thomas from Top Shelf Fandom. This is a storyteller series, How Dan Harmon Tells a Story. I'm here with Roger Roeper from Shat the Movies and Shat on TV. And we're going to be talking about Dan Harmon today. Community, Rick and Morty, Channel 101, all of the ins and outs of this very special comedy writer and storyteller. So if you want to introduce yourself, Raj, and let everybody know where they can find you, what you're all about, and all that, and I'll make sure we're live on the YouTubes.
Yeah, hey everyone, Roger Roeper, again, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for doing this. I'm a huge Dan Harmon fan. I love his projects that he's done. I'm a huge Community stan, Rick and Morty fan as well. I've dressed up as Pickle Rick one Halloween before, like all the hubbub of it. So, but I did not go to McDonald's and lay on the counter table demanding Szechuan sauce. Like, that's where I draw the line. No, I really love his storytelling techniques, and I think it's something that, you know, if for those who are getting involved in, like, you know, independent projects, I think, you know, looking at what he does is a great basis or foundation for you to kind of create your own story. And being an independent podcaster, like you said, I do Shat the Movies. I've done Shat on TV, and then also we started and launched a new project called the Untitled Florida Men Project, where we take the best headlines from my native state of Florida alongside two Florida individuals as well, and we discuss them and kind of revel in the absurdity that is our home state. So that's where you can find me. We're at Shat the Movies and then at the Florida Men.
Yeah.
Or at the Florida Men.
Did you break into jail to hang out with all your friends?
Right. No, we toss alligators in and break them out. That's what we do.
Yeah. Well, they give you exactly what they wanted. Yeah, Charlotte. Yeah, I love me. Yeah. Florida is a gem. It's a gem. Well, it really gave us Roger Roeper, so I'm happy for that.
Little brothers.
Yeah. So you're the best thing to come out of Florida. So yeah, I think that Dan's very interesting. I of course wanted you because I've seen numerous pictures of you dressed up at cons, and you know, to be completely honest, I am not that familiar with. I'm very much familiar with Dan Harmon in the sense of like the news that he creates, meaning, you know, the scandals with Chevy Chase and all of this, and just, you know, he's a very open person, I would say, about his craft, to a fault. But I really can appreciate that, and he seems to revel in chaos and a little bit self-destructive, but I think he thrives in his odd little world, and he creates a lot of odd little worlds for people that might not fit in. So we'll start at the beginning. He doesn't have a lot of standout projects as far as anything before Community to the mainstream, I would say. He has Heat Vision Jack, which was a pilot that never got actually picked up by Fox because it ended up being too expensive, from what I know. Ben Stiller was a part of that. Jack Black, I believe it had a talking motorcycle in it, and it was a rogue, doesn't play by the rules astronaut that Jack Black played, right?
Right, exactly. And I think Owen Wilson was the voice of the motorcycle.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah, what is
so it was an absurd idea that I think he threw together fairly quickly. And for all the Dan Harmon fans, I might be mistaking it with. I know he wrote the Rick and Morty. He and Justin Roiland wrote it in 6 hours.
Yes.
I don't know how long it took for him Heat, Jack, and Vision, but it was you know, to quote you know, for fans of the show, I think Heat, Vision, and Jack was streets ahead of what other sitcoms were, and Fox just didn't know what to do with it because it was so absurd. And he creates these absurd worlds, but then very real characters. And I think that's probably, I think Heat, Vision, and Jack was probably, I could never see it working in a mainstream. For those of you who've never seen it, I think you can Google it. You can get a really low res version of it on YouTube, or at least it used to be there. But it's wacky, but this could never work on a major network.
Yeah, I think that this really this predates even the Adult Swim boom. So this would have been perfect for the adult, as Fox found out when it canceled Family Guy and other properties, and they went to Adult Swim and picked up quite the cult following, which turned into pretty much a mainstream and high concept demographic for them. That this was that odd type of, like, almost Tim and Eric feel to it, and so forth. So yes, he you can see the you can see his work that you see today, you can see the blueprint of it in his earlier projects. But he did start to do this project called Channel 101, which takes place in downtown Los Angeles, and I guess you can attend it live. You'll know more about this than me. But this is kind of like his reaction, how George R.R. Martin, got sick of dealing with television executives and so forth, and the constraints in which it put on him, and pretty much did his fuck you through A Song of Ice and Fire. I feel like this might be Dan Harmon's A Song of Ice and Fire to a pit. Maybe not the best analogy, but it was like his answer to these executives, and being bitched about not getting higher ratings, as he says. I found out the way to get higher ratings. I went to networks that have higher ratings. So do you want to go through what Channel 101 kind of is for people that might not be familiar?
I think at the basic level, the easiest way to understand Channel 101 is that it was an early incarnation of like YouTube. It was an easy early incarnation of Funny or Die, where individuals, content creators would upload their content, and then it would be voted on at monthly shows that they would put on. Those shows that were voted to stayed and came back the following, or those that were, deemed unworthy would not. And I believe it's still going on. It's on hiatus now because of the corona, but that was really where a lot of people were familiar with now, like The Lonely Island. They were part of Channel 101. Justin Roiland was part of Channel 101 and did multiple different shows. Dan Harmon did a lot of different shows. So it was a way for them to work outside of the system. And when you think about today's stars, you think about today's content creators, how they're discovered, or it's breaking through the chasm of having to rely on a system that has all these layers of bureaucracy, and it's about who versus, the strength of your content. This is really kind of what set Hollywood upside down and was the basis of eventually what would come now today, where independent content creators like you and I can just get a halfway decent camera, halfway decent laptop, and start creating content and have people follow us. And it's getting very specialized. We're now in this realm of very specialized, highly specific content for a niche audience versus, widespread network television. We're in that stage in content. And Dan Harmon, I think, I don't know if he saw the vision, and said, this is where I think it's going to go, or maybe he just stumbled upon it. I think that's why people gravitate towards Dan Harmon, is because he is almost this mad genius that has character flaws, but he doesn't try to hide them. He talks about them, and he's very transparent about them. I think that's why people like on Reddit and certain areas of the internet look at him as a revered figure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it could have just been a knee-jerk reaction for him to go and do what he did, because I was watching Gugas the other day, which is now the Guga. Is that what we're calling him? Is that Mr. Meeseeks? Is that an early incarnation of Mr. Meeseeks?
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
But I really it reminded me of when I was they call it telecom in Detroit, but it was TV production. We would make films, and you could tell in a lot of these series, and I'll link it in the information, guys, that they know, like, they're stumbling on lines, I have to believe, on purpose. Are just they're definitely playing off of that. You can tell that almost all of them have been in the industry to some extent, because as we were talking before the show, there's a reporter's little show, and I brought this up to Roger earlier. I could tell, like, there's these little nods to, like, little takes, little whatever, to how Hollywood doesn't understand how a lot of the jobs in which their characters do are actually done. Like the newspaper editor, the head editor, is sitting there with newspapers, not a keyboard, just like typing away on newspapers, like telling them, like, so it's like I found that to be so hilarious, because it's like, yeah, a lot of times these stories, like, what is he? They're like, he's a cop. They're like, how does a precinct work? They're like, fuck, I don't know. You know what I mean?
It's all about breaking down tropes, right? It's all about, it's not insulting the audience, right? It's satire, right? The audience knows, like, Dan Harmon is accused of, like, what, at the apex of popularity of shows like Family Guy, you started seeing, like, the South Park's satire that, right? Or the Simpsons satire Family Guy, where they just said, well, the success of the show is predicated on all flashbacks, and that's all the show is, just flashbacks. Right. Dan Harmon is accused of using nothing but meta jokes.
Yes,
like everything is inside, and you have to be super intelligent, have a super IQ level. And so you see people making fun of that where, oh, you're a Rick and Morty fan? Well, you have to have an IQ of 161 and blah, blah, blah. Like, you don't have to have all of that. And I like the fact that he has running gags or he has little Easter eggs throughout his shows. Like in Community, Abed can be seen in the background throughout the various episodes with another collection of students. And he's like, eventually helps them like give birth to a baby in the back. But like, again, if you're not looking for those things, you wouldn't see it.
Yeah.
But he doesn't, unlike Family Guy, Harmon doesn't rely, in my opinion, strictly on meta or inside jokes.
Yeah, and it's just a different stylistic approach. And I think that what Harmon does very well is he captures the emotional spine of characters and the heart of characters. And that is why he can put them in these absurd situations. We did Nolan last week with John from Cortex Videos, and he's going to be coming back on next month to talk about Dennis. I cannot get this last name. He's directing He's directing Dune.
Villanueva.
There you go. Yeah, I'll get it before next month. But yeah, so it's almost a perfect little segue to go to Dan Harmon next because of how he looks at films like Interstellar. You can catch one of his stand-up bits where he's talking about it and how mystified he is by it, and he's just so immersed. And then it gets to the part where Matthew McConaughey, it links together, from the beginning of the bookcase to the, fifth dimension, and he's like, oh, it's stupid. It's stupid, and I love, I was just talking, because I just recently, embarrassingly enough, with how much I love all the Nolans, except for the brother that killed somebody, it's a little bit odd, I just found that out. But anyways, I really liked Interstellar, but you can tell that Dan Harmon is really about, character, and I hate the whole character versus plot thing. Plot, that pushes your characters, and characters push they both bolster each other. So, but you can definitely tell when something's more character driven. His stories are definitely more character driven. So you see him not liking Interstellar, but him taking Pickle Rick, this absurd situation, and bringing a lot of heart and sentiment and real emotional depth to something so silly. So it's almost like he doesn't want to be playing with a structure that is pristine. He wants to be playing in the mud, but he can really get down to the emotional spine of not just the characters but the viewers through doing this.
Yeah, I think he is quoted as saying it's almost like a Midsummer Night's Dream where the woods are fantastical and magical, but the characters are real, right? Yeah. So in Community had very little to do with community college, and the classes were absurd. There was a class on ladders, there was a class on Can It Be Fried, there's a class on Nicolas Cage, which I actually think that might be a curriculum in some colleges, and if it's not, it should be. But the characters and the way that they interacted was very real. It's the same with Rick and Morty. You talk about Pickle Rick. What people at the surface level who've never watched Rick and Morty and see all the videos of people going, I'm Pickle Rick, and oh my God, the funniest shit ever. He turned himself into a pickle. What they fail to understand is the whole point of that episode of him turning himself into a pickle was to avoid going to family therapy.
Yes.
It was all about avoidance of problems and not facing them in a manner that would be healthy. And he would rather transform himself into a pickle. But because, Rick is supposedly the smartest man in the world, he still was able to overcome the challenges. And that's part of the story arc, right?
Yes.
Unfamiliar situation, how do you overcome all that? And then ultimately at the end, you return somehow changed. And so he, at the end, finally, kicks down the door of the therapist's office and is like, fuck it, I'm here. Let's do this. Right. I went through all of this and I still ended up back here.
Yes.
So that's why I think the brilliancy of that episode is really, truly, like you said, it's the heart. It's what is the message behind it. And I think that's why people keep coming back to Dan Harmon produced shows.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see just because he has the story circle, which I'll put up on screen for everybody. And this is something that's widely talked about. This is something that is, pretty much the hero's journey broken down to a more simplistic form. Also, I've talked about this in other videos about the Snyder beat sheet. There's a lot of formulaic ways, formulas for telling stories, and this is also known as a story embryo. So, meaning any story can exist within this. It's a structure to story, a method to the madness. And what you talked about there is like in Dan Harmon's stories for existence, we've seen this actually. It's been in the dialogue that Rick will never accept a literal call to action, right? Right. So what we're dealing with is in Pickle Rick is interesting because look at the journey that he goes on. He goes on this journey and this adventure not because he's going to solve the problem. He's going on this journey to avoid solving the problem. So it's a beautiful spin on the hero's journey, and it is like I guess that is really not a slight at like I maybe implied a few minutes ago at Hollywood or the tropes or the cliches, but it's just a different take on story, and it's very true to us as people that the lengths we go to avoid responsibility are the consequences and all that is absurd, and it hits home. So we see a transition with him after Channel 101. He obviously links up with Roiland during that process. Schwab, right, as well?
Rob Schraub. Yep. Rob Schraub.
So people that he's going to be,
I believe Rob Schraub and Dan Harmon knew each other from Milwaukee. I think they were friends there and then moved to Hollywood together. I think so.
He definitely finds a home, or at least a group of like-minded people, which we see then the creation of Community. It is worth noting that he did help create the Sarah Silverman show, if you guys remember that on Comedy Central, and this is the first this is the first time that we do see him run into a little bit of trouble, behind the scenes. There was some conflict with him and Sarah. She loved the writing, she loved his creative vision, but Dan is a genius, but it does sound like he's a genius that's, not unlike many other geniuses, isn't the easiest person to get along with. So we're not passing judgment on him, but it's going to play into his career. This is not going to be the last time that there is a conflict. He actually has to leave the show. And they were,
In his, and I think the reason he started his podcast, which I know we're going to touch on in Harmontown, was almost like a self-medication for him, a way for him to go and express his feelings. Because I think at the core of it, Dan Harmon, again, has expressed that he has almost an obsessive compulsion to make the greatest content possible.
Yes.
And I think that, and again, I don't know all the ins and outs of what happened to the Sarah Silverman show. I just kind of know what bits and pieces of it. But I think that he clashed over with the fact that he didn't feel the material was good enough. And ultimately that led to arguments. And, when you're working on a network show and you have, people that also are employed, you can't just not produce content, or you have to eventually just put it out there.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what boiled over. And I think that's what hit, that's why they clashed and eventually led to him leaving. But, ultimately at the end of the day, he landed on his feet with Community.
Absolutely. And it might have been a case of, that is Sarah Silverman's show. It's the literal title of it. So, maybe writing for her and then, telling her what's best for her. Who knows? But there's lots of ins and outs. There's also lawyers that have notes for you,
right.
Also known as executives. And deadlines, as we still see with Rick and Morty, are not something that he's too fond of. So the price of genius. But moving on to Community, a show that has such a cult following. I believe the fans did actually save it once, maybe twice. I think
3 times, if I'm not mistaken.
Maybe 3, guys. Yeah. So it, but this again is Glendale, a community college that is taken from a community college in which he did attend. From what I know, took a few journalism classes. He has no degree in any specific area.
Yeah, I think once he was fired, he went to a community college in Glendale, and either it was in Glendale or because the community is set in Colorado. It's not set in LA where he attended his community college.
Yeah.
But I think he's like, I'm just going to take classes that I'm interested in. So I think he even took a biology class, and that's where he formed the study group. And that ultimately became the impetus, because here he is, this 32, 33-year-old individual who doesn't really need to be there, but he's there, or he doesn't want to be there, but he's there. And then he's surrounded by these 18, 19-year-olds that look up to him like as a hero, right? That look almost, they find him interesting. And you can definitely tell that there's a little bit of Dan Harmon in the Jeff Winger character.
Yes. Society told, it wasn't that he wasn't a good lawyer, it was that he didn't have a degree to do what he was doing, which, being credentialed, so he was forced to go get a degree. It wasn't that he was inept, from my understanding, right? So it was, again, like the system, right? I'm sorry.
Exactly. He didn't have the credentials to be in Hollywood. He was an outsider. He, got these deals from doing stuff on his own. So that, in a way, you're right. Here he was, fairly successful. He's good at what he does, but he's being forced to go and abide by the system that he feels is holding him down. But he ends up meeting real people. He ends up it changed him, and that eventually became the show about Community. And Community kind of morphed into almost like a real life cartoon. But again, it was this fantastical world that real characters and the real heart of the show really shined through. And for a show like it totally transformed what a real sitcom could be. And if you were to compare, Dan Harmon does this all the time. If you compare Community versus like Big Bang Theory, right? You know what I mean? He's not making a show for mainstream audiences. He is, again, streets ahead, where he's making content specifically for an audience that are just, they just love. And, NBC, I think Bob, was it Bob Rob, someone who greenlit NBC's Community then left, and I think that's why it was perennially on the chopping block or being moved around.
And it you really do have to look at creators like Dan Harmon and appreciate them, because they're going out on a limb there, because he knows, and there's a quote, I don't know verbatim, but about finding those people that have that same voice, and they'll come. Mm-hmm. And as you spoke to brilliantly earlier about Channel 101, that it was ahead of its time. It's like, TV is going to stay these episodic, situational comedies because that's the formula they have that works in the past. So it takes somebody to come in and break down doors, not to get all, righteous about it, but it really does. It takes a change in the guard, and that change is never met with like a lot of smiling faces. It's like, no, we need another Seinfeld. Let's give every stand-up a fucking show. Let's do this. You know what I mean? Like, in Seinfeld was revolutionary. Its own way, but blah, blah, blah. You need to come in there and change things up. But Community is a show that is very, I'd have to imagine the notes that came back to him were very well, first off, the amount of them had to be atrocious, but I could see them looking at it and just not understanding what it is, right?
They never understood what it was, and that's very evident, especially I think at the time when it debuted. That was the time of where you had The Office, Parks and Rec, Community, and God, what was the fourth?
You have Parks and Rec, Office, you have
30 Rock. Yes. 30 Rock.
Yeah, and 30, like the other shows that you mentioned, it's important at this time to take note of the grammar of storytelling is almost changing with the documentary style, the faux doc, so they can break the fourth wall and they can talk. And this is something Arrested Development kind of like they kind of beat them to the punch with and played off of that, and it, kind of just played around with a new style of storytelling, more so with the way they film it and stuff like that. But
and I would say that Community has more in common with shows like 30 Rock or Brooklyn Nine-Nine than it does with shows like Parks and Rec or The Office, right? With that faux documentary side, it was like a single shot camera. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, fans of that, and I like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I'm not a huge,
it's a fun show.
It's a fun show. Yeah. But especially now with all the, police brutality protests and everything like that, people are saying, well, how can you watch a show about funny cops? And I think the argument for Brooklyn Nine-Nine is that it's set almost in a parallel universe where cops are funny and, there's not all these troubles in the world. And so like you can kind of turn your brain off and kind of experience it. Same thing with like Community. It's not really a community college. It's,
it's a playground.
Again, it's a playground, right? There's but yet there's elements that speak to our world here. So I think that is again, if you haven't watched Community, it's on Netflix, it's on Hulu. I mean, there's no excuse. Check it out, especially as we slowly recover from Corona.
Yeah, and you can pick up. I recommend you do watch it from the beginning, but you can go to just a season and kind of like watch here and there. They're not necessarily bottle episodes, but they are. These are all people that really would be going to a community college per se, for the most part.
Right.
The college itself is not really what you'd be doing there. There's like pillow fort wars that go on for a week and stuff, but it's amazing. And like you said, I totally agree that Community is nothing like The Office or anything. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Or Modern Family, uses the same formula and stuff.
Right.
And The Big Bang Theory, you mentioned it earlier. I forgot to get my hate out. That is if I have to, teach a class about, comedy writing, which I don't think I'm qualified to do, but if I did, I would use that as an example of exactly what not to do. If you're smart enough to get the little, the geekdoms or whatever, like all their little fixes, because the joke is they're nerds, but they're smarter than everybody else, and they use their obsession with pop culture and all this to, show up to everybody else. But the problem is, when Sheldon unlocks a lock using whatever procedure he's supposed to use, the average person, that's going to go over their head, but the person that knows about that, skill set will realize that it's also not the way that works. So they fail on two fronts. So it's if you're smart enough to get it, it's not, you're going to be like, what the fuck? That's not how that goes. And then most of the people are like, well, I guess he's smart. He recharged the car battery with some potatoes or something. You know what I mean? It's so they just, they fail on all fronts, and it's just a show of references, and it sickens me.
There's an element of me that says I don't want to shit on anyone's fandom. You know what I mean? If you enjoy The Big Bang Theory and that's your show, who am I to tell you what not to do? But for me, it's it feels artificial. Yeah. You know what I mean? It just, and it doesn't feel grounded in reality. Whereas,
nothing's real about it to me. But I agree, though. But I always say this: if what you like is what you like. And this goes for reviewing in any type of film criticism, or when we talk about television shows, there's what they set out to do, and I judge it on if they've accomplished what they've set out to do. Sure. And then I say, now, did Justin like it? Because that's subjective. What I like, I mean, sometimes it comes down to the tone, literally the lighting of a show didn't make me feel good, or you know what I mean, something was off about it. Devs, but it's just a bit bad vibe, something you can't even explain. So it's if you enjoy something, enjoy it. It's not up for debate. Your feelings are your feelings. So
and if you're gonna start at Community at the pilot, give it 3 or 4 episodes.
Yeah.
Because it really starts, and season 2 is probably the best season of Community. But even there's episodes in season 5 when Troy leaves, I think is episode 4 where they do the hot lava. Mm-hmm. Again, brilliant episode, but also has a lot of heart at the end. And if you don't watch it all the way, you might miss some references. But if you watch it all the way through, you're going to get a lot of callbacks, very similar to Rick and Morty, again, which is one of his, what happened after Community is you can go in, and the story circle that Harmon has created, to your point, create self-containment, right? Yes. You can jump in and watch anything and not have to worry. Who are these characters? Them. They're so well developed. But if you watch Rick and Morty all the way through, you're going to catch past references, and you're going to catch a little bit of meta jokes, which I think a lot of the fans keep coming back for.
The rewatchability is definitely there, and Community
it's all there.
Is a fantastic example of, again, your Summer Night's Dreams reference, and it is, again, I will admit that when it was on at first, I did not follow. I was working nights DJing, so I wasn't watching as much TV. And now I went back through the years here and there and watched another season, and it's always a fun watch. And if you're a fan of Rick and Morty, you're definitely going to like that. And it really shows, the Russo brothers, who go on to do The Winter Soldier, and give Harmon a connection, which we'll talk about in a minute, to the MCU, and getting called in to advise on Doctor Strange and stuff. He is a respected genius, or is getting more respect as of late. But yeah, it is definitely just a really fun show, but it has a lot of heart. All the characters have that, I always say, emotional spine, and it connects you to it. And you can take them and put them in these abstract situations, these obscure, obscene situations, and it doesn't matter, because it's still at the base, that primitive, primal emotion that's there, and it carries through. There is an ongoing thread.
And you'll also see some Community actors show up in some MCU franchises. I think
Donald Glover's in all of them. I think.
There's so there's some cameos there, and then in Rick and Morty Community also shows up in the Unity episode.
Yeah, I think that isn't Christine Hendricks from Mad Men in that as well.
Christina Hendricks is Unity.
Yeah,
right.
that makes sense. But I like that when you look at Dan Harmon, as I said, it's an ongoing. I'm not going to say trend, but again, in Community, I'll bring up that it's the fourth season, right? That he has to leave the show.
Yeah, that is the gas leak season.
Okay, so which is obviously not loved by the fans. What now? Since you're more of a fan of it than I.
Yeah.
Okay, just take out that Dan got booted for a season. What do you think about that season?
It's fine. There's a couple good episodes. I mean, again, I'm a fan, but there's not. It's not my favorite episode, or it's not my favorite season. I'll still watch it. I think Megan Gans, who's now the executive producer and writer for It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and then she also created the show. Oh, it's escaping me. Where she created with Rob from It's Always Sunny. It's on Apple. It's on Apple TV Plus about the game.
Oh yeah,
creator.
Rob. Yeah, I've seen the trailers for it. I haven't seen it.
Well, Megan Gantz also famously had a spat with Dan Harmon where she accused him of sexual harassment, and Dan came out and formally apologized and said he was completely in the wrong, and what he was doing was, lashing back out someone that didn't, return back the favors that he was doing, and he was very real about it. And I'm not making excuses for him, but at least he, fessed up to it and publicly apologized for what he did. And so I think a lot of fans of Dan Harmon, like the real toxic ones, really attack Megan Gantz, and I think that's where a lot of the hate also for season 4 comes from. Is the hate of, and blaming her for him leaving. So some of that toxicity is also related to why people don't like season 4. But you can also see, for me anyway, I see a lot of outside influence, because also the Russo brothers aren't there, and so you see a lot of like network executives thinking, oh well, you guys are crazy, you're that crazy show that we have, you do a whole show with puppets and they're singing, and it just doesn't feel right. It feels like someone is making a bad imitation of what they think Community is. It's like bad fanfic, and so that's why belovedly it's labeled the gas leak episode, where there was a giant gas leak, and I think it's even written in season 5, where there was a giant gas leak and everyone acted crazy, and then they fixed it when Dan.
It is a total retcon of like.
It's exactly. They do a repilot in episode 1 of season 5, which is great.
Yeah, and it is just he's a very unique guy. And he's a very open guy, and I think that how open he is, maybe sometimes, to his own detriment. But I think it actually helps him a lot to be so open with people. And we'll get into the podcast in a minute. Also, to take note of the Chevy Chase incident. Chevy doesn't seem like the best person to work with, or at least on that show. And there was a lot made of that. And there's a little bit of a feud. He played Chevy's voicemail at the rap party, I believe. But the one thing you got to give Chevy in that is when he says. He goes, you're not funny. He goes, you're all right. Like, it's just this great little Dan. Like, it's horribly, it's filled with just a bunch of anger and spite. But yeah, they didn't get along. But it doesn't seem like a lot of people got along with Chevy. And it seemed like Chevy didn't think that he was on the same level with those people. So, but feuds happen. But you can see the people that work with Harmon throughout the years as well stick with Harmon. So those that like him love him, and that's hey, I've kind of got a personality like that, so people either love me or hate me. There's no in between. So
you and me, brother.
Yeah, so it is what it is. So Community, definitely a good watch, and you can see a lot of the Rick and Morty, at least the formula for that type of storytelling of these crazy adventures that don't actually like have that much on the line, like or it's not like part of an ongoing thread with Rick and Morty. At least like Rick is the smartest guy in the universe supposedly, but like every episode he's going to get like some crystals for this. It's never like to save the world. It's just like running errands, right? Like
the world exists for Rick's pleasure.
Yeah.
Or the universe exists for Rick's pleasure.
Yeah, so it's never like a situation where it's like, this galaxy war, except for the Crank Wars or whatever they were. But yeah, it's very interesting. Again, of doing something that is very deep, but doing it in a setting that is just wacky and crazy. And like you said, they probably went onto the set of Community. They're like, oh, do some more wacky stuff, fellas. You crazy waxsters. So before we go into Rick and Morty, which will be the final point of as of right now for Dan Harmon, I do want to talk a little bit about Harmontown and Harmon Quest. Podcasting, something that both of us can relate to, obviously, and burying your soul on the mic, or at least getting it out or using it in a very therapeutic sense. It's something that Dan Harmon, after that incident I spoke about, with Chevy Chase's voicemail, that hit Gawker, and that caused a lot of issues for Harmon and Chevy. At the time, the fans petitioned again to keep it on the internet. So you got to say he's got his base, but he decided that to saturate the airwaves with all of his nonsense and say that it's not even newsworthy anymore because it's just happening so much. That's his excuse, but I think that he really finds a therapeutic, there's a therapeutic sense that I get from him with his podcasting. And what is your take on him? A guy that's arguably, he's got to be pretty rich by the point that he starts podcasting, right? Like, it doesn't seem like he's doing it for the money. Like, I wonder if Harmontown cost him money.
No, I believe it was a show at the Meltdown, if I'm not mistaken, in LA, and it was a weekly show that he would go, and it would be recorded, and then he would release the audio. And so he did it with Jeff. Oh God, what's his last name? What's his buddies? And then also Spencer Crittenden, and then I think his now ex-wife. All were characters on Harmontown. And
sorry, I couldn't help you out with the names. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm trying. I wish I don't. No, you don't need. Yeah, I'm like, I should be helping him.
I apologize for the audience. Yeah, I apologize for the audience. I probably should have written this down here. But anyway, yeah. So it really, the titular character of Harmontown is Dan Harmon, and he would sit up there and he would basically ramble. I don't think there were notes. It wasn't really a stand-up show. Yeah. There'd be funny things. There would be audience participation, and then at the end, or towards the end, they would play like a game of D&D. And that's where they found Spencer Crittenden. Yeah. And Spencer Crittenden is this this crazy dungeon master that just happened to be at the show, Harmontown, and at one of the shows. And he did such a good job that they kept inviting him back. And that eventually led to him doing a documentary about Harmontown, where it was, if you haven't watched the documentary Harmontown, highly suggest you watch it. It gives a great insight into the man who Dan Harmon is and how his mind operates, and how there's a lot of, we think of these Hollywood producers, we think of these showrunners, we think of these creators as almost superhuman, but it really pulls the curtain back and shows you, this is a real person with real anxiety and depression and self-doubt and procrastination, and we all have those. And so not only does it explore that, but it also explores this character, Spencer, who is it's the ultimate story of a fan of someone who was living a life that he probably didn't want to live. And then he was plucked out of obscurity and now is almost the star and is so beloved by fans. And his talents were then taken to one of my favorite shows that Dan Harmon has done, which is Harmon Quest. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, his mother is dropping him off at the bus stop to go and go on a tour bus with Harmon. And I watched the documentary recently, and it definitely does not seem like he has a type 5 or a set stand-up.
No.
It is him, for better or worse, every single night. And we do see the ups and downs with his relationship. I cannot recall her name either. I'm not going to even try.
Gosh, what is her name? Erin McGathy.
There we go. So, hold on, I just want to go to the chat and say hi really quick. She got some shit. Ion Throne, Shat on TV, fan right there. What's
nice.
Up? What's up, AU? What's up, John? What's up? I cannot pronounce your name, Akil. I'm sorry. And James and Amberlyn and everybody, thanks for joining us. This is usually a Patreon-only thing, but it is live for everybody today and free. So we're just talking about Dan Harmon. But yeah, definitely check out Shat on TV if you guys haven't. It is in the information below. But like you're saying, it takes Spencer, who claims that he was looking to he thought it might be a place, like Harmon does speak about, for people to find like minds, to find people to play D&D with.
Right.
And I tend to believe that. You know what I mean? It sounds a little bit like, like the causality's a little too perfect. But it definitely worked out.
No, it's a real story. Yeah, it's a real story. And the Harmontown tour came at the heels, like he had already met Spencer and all that kind of stuff. I think for the documentary, they're kind of telling the story of Spencer. But like Harmontown, the documentary chronicles their first tour, where they were like, it'd be like if you took the Justin Thomas show on the road, or I took Shat the movies on the road, and we didn't know how this was going to go. We didn't have any kind of idea for a show. We just kind of got up and, kind of did our movie reviews in front of people. And I think that, that kind of chronicles it. But what it shows is less of Dan and more of, again, the community around that follows this guy. And again, talks to the specialized content that we're now all experiencing with the advent of like Twitch and YouTube and, very specific types of podcasts. And I think, what I'm seeing and I'm fearful of, not to get too far off the rails here, but you're starting to see large corporations come in and monopolize content. Spotify making big splashes with signing Joe Rogan, doing, exclusive content, which I think, we'll see how that plays out. But what's going to happen to the smaller creators? Are we now going to have to pay to publish our show? I think that's the danger.
I think that all mediums eventually conform, and it's sad, and we'll have it's like an escape galaxy that we're going to have to go and make something else our own, because that's why I appreciate Conan, appreciate Dan Harmon, people that adopted it before, and adopted it in seemingly more of an organic sense. There's nothing wrong with a capitalistic approach. I don't make a lot of money off my channel, but I wouldn't lie. It takes a lot of my time, and the more money I can get from it makes it easier for me to make content. I put my time in anything. I would like to be rewarded, but that's not the sole reason for doing it. But when you see people just piggyback, and come in way too late and buy their way in, I'm not down for that either. But it definitely shows his writing process as well during Harmontown. And it's he takes comedy very seriously. If anybody knows any comedians, I went to Second City. I helped write my buddy's stand up. I always say I'm going to go up myself, but I always write a type 5 and don't end up going. But I've written, like type 5s with other people and stuff like that. Yeah. And you definitely, you got to know that like funny people are usually tears of the clown. You know what I mean? They're not always the happiest people, unfortunately. And he talks there's a good Google talk with him where he speaks about like, comedy is a medium so the people that work in the mines can forget they work in the mines. It's what gets people through their lives, to distract them and to stop them from asking too many questions that they're not going to like the answers to. So there is that nihilistic sense to Harmon as well, which you definitely see with Rick. You definitely see a indication or implication that he doesn't believe that being smarter is definitely advantageous. The more you know, the sadder you are and stuff like that. But he takes it very seriously. But also this leads to, a lot of drinking, he's writing 2 scripts on spec, I think, during that. One for CBS, I think one for Fox. And it's good because you get to hear them giving him notes, and it's great because they're like, we didn't really get that, and it's like, that's fair enough, you got network execs are usually lawyers, like they're, and they're necessary people, but it's kind of got to be a bitch to deal with that, especially when your genius has shined through so many times. That it's like, okay, you guys don't get it, but there's other people that do. But you see him procrastinate. You see him, act out. You see him make some questionable choices about, disclosing things about his relation. You see him as a real person and vulnerable, like you said. And I really think that there is something that's very endearing about that. It's a thin line, but I think Dan Harmon's riding it well, and I think he owns his mistakes. And you see the heart of him in that, and what drives him to want to create something so great, but also can be a little bit inconsistent. because of that
Correct.
that need to make something so perfect. So going on to Rick and Morty, which I was late to the game as well.
Okay.
But not that late. I've been watching it for like 2 years now. But I didn't watch like when it first came out, and I just then I was like, okay, whatever. And then I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with it. I love that it is again playing with all the tropes and going, and you see so many references to Hollywood. Which when I asked on Reddit what makes him different than say a Seth MacFarlane, because there is some similarities there with they both obviously watched a lot of TV. They both are in love with classic like 80s and 90s television and stuff like that, and like the play off of that. There's a lot of differences though, obviously, with the animation and with the way in which they tell stories, as you spoke about before, mostly being like the little family circle cutaways and stuff like that with Family Guy. But Rick and Morty again is got that audience that it's the outliers. But it's also that debate of, are you intelligent if you watch Rick and Morty? Or like I've seen Justin Roiland's take on this. I don't know if you've seen Dan Harmon's take. Is he doesn't want to like crap on the fans for saying like how smart it is. But I don't believe that's really their intent to go out and do. They'd like to make everything as scientifically accurate as they can within reason, and they're not trying to make the Big Bang Theory. But they are telling a story that sounds sappy and all that. It's of the heart, more than anything. It's about a family. It's about a mother and father that probably shouldn't be married, but they're married and they're getting through it. The power dynamic within the house. What would you say sets Rick and Morty apart from other cartoons like Family Guy and South Park, other than just obvious no cutaways, no?
Yeah, I think the fact that it doesn't talk down to its audience, like I think it really tries to not do that. I also think again, the characters are real. You know who Morty is. You know who Rick is. Like they don't deviate from their characters, although, they live in this fantastical environment where there are multiple parallel universes. So there can be a rabbit Morty. There can be a rabbit, catcher Rick. Or one of my favorite episodes is Tales from the Tales from the
it's the multiverse
where all the Ricks live, where they all created that. And
Citadel,
Tales from the Citadel.
Yeah.
If he is Rick Prime, if he's the most Rick of all the Ricks, it would make sense of why he would want to destroy this, because the ultimate Rick would not want a layer upon layer of bureaucracy.
They hate a government so much they created a government.
They created a government, right? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and he wants to break that down. So but I love I love concepts like that. I loved this season, the whole and again it's very meta, but the story train episode was fucking fantastic. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. If you're a fan of Rick and Morty, you're a fan of Dan Harmon, watch the story train episode, because they're basically making fun of the whole process of creating Rick and Morty.
Yes. You see the dynamic between the Ricks and the Mortys, right? And you see how in the other universes, within this multiverse, that a lot of the, Ricks just like, they see Mortys as like expendable. Like when he gets the ticket for like one, like whatever, it's like a
one free Morty.
Yeah, one free Morty, and then he takes it. But like Rick has more heart than the rest of our Rick. The Rick from Sector, I forget, C something. But,
C-137.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed, and I don't know because I haven't seen all of the latest season, is, and I think that fans are very, very invested in it, but I'm curious on your take. With Evil Morty, he has injected something into his story that I have not seen so much in Community or any of his other projects, with that very important ongoing thread, right? That he is expected to follow back up on. And it to mean something significant. How do you feel he's going to pull that off? Do you think? I think it could be a downfall for him.
Well, I think he pulled it off already in the Story Train.
See, I have not seen that episode. I have not seen it.
You gotta watch the Story Train episode, because like they address it there, and they're like, all of this doesn't really fucking matter.
Okay, there we go.
None of this really matters. Like, oh, you thought we were gonna do something with Evil Morty? We didn't. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's so there's.
How was the reception overall to that, though?
Oh, I think the Story Train is one of the best episodes, because then at the end it has a stinger of like, oh, go out and buy this fucking toy. Go. Can I curse on the show? I apologize.
Yeah, fuck it.
Okay. So yeah, they're like, go out and buy this, buy the story train. They put up a literal URL that pointed to nothing, knowing that people at the end of the episode would go and try and buy the story train, because ultimately, they're making fun of the fact that Rick and Morty has gotten so commercial.
Yeah.
And fuck you. Like, this is all what it's for. There's a disease going on right now. Stay at home, buy shit. Like, there's a nihilistic viewpoint of this American consumerism where we have to buy the shit that we're fans of and all of that. And so it's shining light on what we all know is occurring and taking it almost a nihilistic viewpoint, but making it also somewhat entertaining. And that is what he did kind of towards the end, like the season 6 of Community on Yahoo. A lot of people don't like, but I feel it's the closest relationship that Dan Harmon has with what will eventually become Rick and Morty. There's a stinger at the end of, I think, the finale, where they're saying, "Oh, you love the show, now buy the game Community."
Yeah.
And then eventually throughout the commercial, they learn that they are just people in a commercial and that none of this matters. They don't actually really exist.
Yeah, I was wondering.
And so it was almost a same thing of what became of Story Train.
Okay, see, I had not seen the episode, and at least I was wondering how they were going to stick that landing, because it is always a risk when you Always Sunny in Philadelphia is also another show that's known for, like, not ever, because it's death to progress a plot in an episodic, it's not the same show, but a serialized situational comedy. It's death to have progression. Your kids got to go to college eventually, blah blah blah. The story changes. It's no longer a story about the new dad and all that when Michelle is 18 going off or whatever. So I was wondering, when they dedicate themselves to a ongoing thread that especially has so much interest in it, like Evil Morty does, I'm happy to hear that they were able to get themselves. I don't want to say get themselves out of it, because I really enjoyed it, but end it in a way that's true to what this show does, because just like Community, it has a lot of I hate the word bottle episode, but it's self-contained. And it's a adventure every episode.
The arc lives within that episode. You don't need to watch. It's not like I gotta watch 10 episodes of this. 13 Reasons Why on Netflix to figure out the conclusion of this. I don't need to watch all 10 episodes of Ozark. It's not one large giant movie, right? It really truly is all self-contained. And the one thing that they did bring back was Phoenix Person, the final episode. But they left the door open for more Phoenix Person, and they left the door open for Evil Morty as well. But again, and that's why they every season, if you're a fan of like the opening title or opening, I guess it's the opening titles, right, of Rick and Morty, where it shows them on adventures and it takes clips of adventures that they're going to be on. Well, every season there's this one scene of them escaping a Cthulhu-like character, like with the baby Cthulhu.
Yeah.
You still have never seen that one. And then I think this season there was one with a goose, like the Angry Goose game that was popular for a little while. That was never shown, right? So they purposefully trick the audience, or they purposefully know that the audience is going to be looking for clues and going on threads and Reddit and breaking all this down. But then they throw these little, red herrings to get them off their scent.
They leave the breadcrumbs, but they don't leave you with an empty stomach. They still they remind you of what because it's always a balance of what you think you like about a show and then what you really like, and that's what makes these creators so fantastic, like Dan Harmon. It's like we saw it again with Community. Not keep bringing it up, but it's a perfect example of people being like, okay, so this is a wacky show, let's go in there. It's like, all right. Hold up, because it's easier said than done, and you can't just tell Donald Glover to be fucking wacky. You can, baby Gambino, or what is it? Childish Gambino.
How dare you?
Yeah, baby Gambino. They're Childish Gambino. Yeah. So
the other thing I do want to point out though is acknowledgement for Justin Roiland and his own creative genius. He has taken the story structure element of what Dan Harmon has created. And infused his own thoughts into that as well. And I know Dan Harmon is also heavily involved with Rick and Morty. But if you haven't checked it out, go check out his show that Justin Roiland that just debuted on Hulu. What is it called? Solar Opposites. Go see Solar Opposites on Hulu. It's pretty good. it's if you're a fan of Rick and Morty, you'll like Solar Opposites.
Yeah, I saw them being compared. On the structure of Rick and Morty, the one thing I wanted to talk about within the story circle is it's interesting, and it points to his nihilistic approach. Instead of overcoming odds, which obviously there's always hurdles to be jumped, but they pay the price for getting what they want in the story. It's always a price that's paid. It's listed,
right?
So it's not always. It's usually listed as a lesson learned, but this is always pays a price. So it's like pays a price. So it's like always like kind of this dark tone to it. Like, they get back. We've seen it in multiple Rick and Morty episodes, sometimes digging their own graves, and so forth. But it's very deep, and it's it is a special type of storytelling. And I don't want to I don't want to act like I don't appreciate it or think it's special, but again, there are plenty of formulas for storytelling. The story circle, I believe, is something that's very easy to explain, which is probably the reason in which he utilizes it, and because it's thus easy to explain, so it's easy to execute. But in no way is it simplistic. An intelligent person can break down something very complex in a simplistic way. So I think that's what he's done there, and it is, something that he also will deviate from every once in a while. But I always found that interesting that it always says pay a price. You know what I mean? Like, right. I'm like, damn, it's dark.
And I think, and in doing my research for the episode, I also learned that like a lot of times Rick is the only character that can skip steps because of his nihilistic viewpoint. There are times where he doesn't learn anything, and he just return, and that is his character. But then there are episodes like the Unity episode, where he comes back and he pays a heavy price for understanding that he'll never be able to truly be with someone that he loves because he can't change who he is, and makes him want to die.
Yeah, it's mostly him, observing Morty go through these changes, on these, like, or
his family, right?
Yeah, like, hey, this is your time to pick up an adventure, so we'll go on yours, and then Morty's never works out. But yeah, it is more of a learning experience for Morty, but I think that Rick has some hard truths that he faces as well. And it's the law of diminishing returns. So I think less is better with Rick, because when Rick does, like you said, with Unity and all that, learn something, it's more impactful. So it's always a return to normalcy, and you see that he's the most powerful man in the universe, but cannot get a stranglehold on that power dynamic within that atomic family. You know what I mean?
He can't change himself, right?
No.
Like he can create anything, but he can't change himself, or he can change anything, but he can't change himself.
Yeah, I think that what do you think that he's going to go down as one of the not just breakout, but one of the most influential comedy writers? You think he's going to, you could say Justin Roiland might be, I don't know if it's fair to call him a product of Harmon. I know, you know what I mean, but he definitely had some tutelage under him, but I don't know what he was been a part of the game for about as long. He's a little bit younger, but I'm sure Harmon took the lead, and now he obviously with Solar Opposites is stepping out into his own. But I'm talking about more like people that have watched their productions and stuff like that. Do you see a future of people just citing Dan Harmon, like how people will be like Kubrick.
I don't know if Harmon will ever reach Kubrick level status.
It's kind of different with comedy. It's kind of
I unfortunately, because Aristotle said that comedy is the inverse of tragedy, right? There's a happy ending instead of a sorrowful ending, and you can't. And like you said, like again, Dan Harmon's nihilistic viewpoint is comedy serves the purpose to distract the masses from the inequalities that are being pressed upon them. And that's true, especially in our society. So I think that there should be a more emphasis, and people should respect comedy more. And a lot of times, in the absence of comedy, there's authoritarianism.
Yeah.
And so we should really respect creators of comedy like Dan Harmon in the same viewpoint that we do with Kubrick. But let's be real, no one's ever really going to do that. Yeah. But I do believe in the medium that he has done with how he's been able to transform and democratize content through Channel 101, which became the impetus for other and the blueprint for other YouTube Pornhub, you know what I mean? Like all these the way that we consume content on the internet, the fact that he turned sitcoms on its head and said it can be done differently, the fact that he worked outside the Hollywood industry or game and still was able to break through. The fact that he changed the podcasting game, I think there's all these influences that you can point back to someone like Dan Harmon and say, yeah, he's, in our time, he's really been one of the more influential players. And I don't know if he'll ever really get the acceptance from the traditional powers that be. Certainly has fans on the internet, fans like you and I, and things like that. But I don't know if he'll ever be as revered as he is outside of San Diego Comic-Con.
Yeah, and then that's fair, and that does seem to be just the way it goes with comedy. I'd say that since we do have such an insight to him, like I said, for better or worse, that I do have hopes that he will be reflected upon as maybe, a little bit of a philosopher, you know what I mean? A little bit of a more than just a guy that made cartoons, just because of his approach to storytelling, how open he's been about it, his process, again, for better or worse. And the good thing about it is there's generations of people coming up that this is what they experience for their comedic relief. So when they become that lawyer that's an executive at MGM or Fox, but it's true, but they will get scripts that come in, like that are inspired by Dan's work. People will write comedy that fits. They won't just try to mimic him. That will be their base. That will be what they're not going to see it as out of the norm. He's created it to be the norm, and then then somebody will go and they'll fucking steamroll that and be like, this is a new way. So this is all this old Harmon shit right here. So but no, I think it's very important. That's why I wanted to have you on, because you obviously are more knowledgeable about him than I am. But I definitely respect the guy. I respect the hell out of him for how much he's put himself out there. Obviously, I relate a lot to him, for better or worse, with his issues of wanting to do things and be creative and all that. He's chugged probably way too many bottles of vodka throughout his day, as he would admit. The ups and downs of being a person that has creative ambitions, and but he's just got all the talent that goes along with that too. I think I just had the drinking.
I would love to live in his mind. I think his mind operates on a level that is different than a lot of people, and it's so cool to see him use that for good.
And he'd probably gladly allow you to occupy it if you could get out of it.
Probably.
That's the sad tragedy of it, but that's what makes it poetic. He's like, poetic, fuck you, man. It sucks.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But come on, clown. Yeah. But no, he is definitely, he's changed the game, and, it is amazing. I'm 35 years old now, and I remember when Family Guy was canceled and brought back, and they're like, oh, this is a new way of comedy, and then Rick and Morty kind of makes that just look like so just basic
old
bitch,
school.
basic shit,
bitch,
man. You're like, oh, and I love Family Guy still. I think it's
sure.
It's again, when I set my expectations for it's appropriate. I've got people ask me like, well, what you watch? Like, I used to watch Superstore. Up until recently, but it's not that great. It's just like every once in a while, like when I get done like writing a fucking video essay about Westworld, I just want to like watch something and fall asleep.
You want to turn your brain off, and that's why I think people still like Big Brain Theory, is because the miners in the coal mine, they can turn their mind off and not have to worry about being fucked over by the man.
Yeah, I'm not like, ooh, what are they really saying here about society? Right, yeah. What is the human condition? Is it being revealed here? No, yeah, it's it's like, hey, it's a fucking store. It's kind of fun. You know what I mean? Like, it is it's just like, great, man. Just turn it off. It doesn't always have. It's what they set out to do, and then if they achieve that, and then if you like it or not. So yeah, I'd love to have you on again. We'll be doing some filmmakers. We've got Heidi from Costume Co. coming on next week. We've got Gray Area after that for some George R.R. Martin. And then we're going to be doing everybody from Kubrick to Spike Lee with Tony Teflon. Somebody Axel Foley picked up Kubrick.
Cool.
So and I'm going to have to learn how to say Dennis
Villeneuve.
No.
Villanueve.
Audio.
There you go.
Yeah, so
Dennis V,
everybody. Yeah, the V Meister. So yeah, I'll see if I get some names going. So yeah, check out Roger. I'm really excited for that Florida Man. I love some Florida Man.
It's jokes. Fun. Yeah. It's good times. Check us out on Twitch and YouTube's, and we're gonna be hopefully broadcasting it on podcasts as well.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Fucking killing some crocodiles, man. Yeah.
There's some great stories.
Yeah, I couldn't believe half those are true. The guy that stole the car and then had a baby in the back seat and returned the baby and then still drove away with their car. Like, that was cool.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, oh, I'm not a fucking kidnapper. Come on.
What am I?
Yeah.
What am I, a heathen? No.
So what have I become?
I'm going to carjack you, but I'm going to return the baby, obviously.
Like, did he just leave? We're happy with the baby. He's like, all right, guys, see you later. Yeah, so, check them out. Thank you guys so much. And the actual Content Explained channel will be launching this week. Finally, I had to get a new camera, which you can tell I have to get the settings better, the HD camera, because it looks like I'm powder. Or maybe I do have something going on. I'll go to the doctor. All right. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you